My name is Elaine, and I didn't realize my life had gone gray until the day the soup turned orange. That's the thing about midlife burnout. It doesn't arrive all at once. It sneaks in slowly, like a dimmer switch. One day you wake up and realize the color has quietly drained out of almost everything. At 57, I had a perfectly fine life on paper. I'd been an office administrator at the same insurance company for nearly 20 years. I knew the phone system better than the IT guy, could decode my boss's half-sent emails, and could put together a spreadsheet faster than most of the 20-somethings in the cubicles. I also woke up every weekday with a knot in my stomach. It wasn't that my job was terrible. It just wasn't anything anymore. Not exciting, not meaningful. Just a long, endless to-do list I could practically complete in my sleep. Stable is good, people would say, and I'd nod because they weren't wrong. Stable pays the bills. Stable covers the car and the tiny townhouse and the co-pay for my blood pressure meds. Stable helps when your daughter calls because the daycare just raised their rates again. But there's a difference between stable and stuck. I was stuck. My days blurred. Commute, emails, forms, coffee, forms, more emails, microwave lunch at my desk, polite small talk in the break room about the weather and the latest streaming show, then back home to a house that was tidy and quiet and far too still. My friends joked that I needed a hobby. I tried a book club. The organizer wanted us to read dense literary novels about unhappy people making bad choices. I made it through 1.5. I tried an online yoga class. My knees staged a protest, and my Wi-Fi gave out mid-downward dog. I tried scrolling social media at night, watching other people's lives unfold in vacation photos and grandkid videos, and I quit my job at 50 and started my dream business posts. Mostly, I just ended up feeling tired and behind. The change started on a Tuesday afternoon, of all things, in the break room at work. I was waiting for the microwave to ding, watching my leftovers spin in circles, when I noticed a bright flyer pinned to the bulletin board. Volunteers, NEDD Weekly Soup Kitchen Saturday mornings, St. Mark's Church basement. No experience necessary. Come as you are. We'll show you what to do. Someone had doodled a little steaming bowl in the corner. Another person had written in pen, "Great place, nice people." I stared at it longer than made sense. A soup kitchen. I'd never been to one. I didn't even know our city had one. You see them in movies set in big cities, lines of people in heavy coats and knit hats, volunteers in hairnets ladling food. I'd always assumed if they existed near me, I'd somehow know. Apparently, they did. And apparently, they needed hands. For reasons I couldn't fully explain, I snapped a photo of the flyer with my phone. That night, the image kept floating back into my mind as I loaded the dishwasher and fed the cat, and tried to decide whether I cared enough to watch the news. Saturday mornings, I murmured. I usually just do laundry, scroll, maybe grocery shop. The idea made my shoulders tense. Another commitment, another place to be, another thing to manage. But underneath the tension, something else stirred. Feeling I hadn't had in a long time, curiosity. What would it be like to spend a few hours doing something that wasn't about forms or emails or quarterly reports? To stand in a room with people who needed something I could actually hand them. I stared at the number on the flyer. "What's the worst that could happen?" I asked the cat. He blinked and flicked his tail, which I took as a yes. I picked up my phone and dialed. St. Mark's Community Outreach, a cheerful voice answered. "This is Denise." "Hi," I said, suddenly nervous. "I saw your flyer at Briarwood Insurance. About the soup kitchen." "Oh," she said, instantly brighter. "Yes, that's us. Are you thinking about volunteering?" The word felt too big for what I had in mind. "I was curious," I said. "I've never done anything like that before. I'm not a great cook or anything. I just wondered if you still needed help. We always need help, she said warmly. And you don't need to be a chef. If you can show up on time, take direction, and stir a pot without spilling it everywhere, we can use you. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. I can stir a pot, I said, and I'm pretty good at showing up on time. Wonderful, she said. We're here every Saturday, 7:30 to about noon. You can try it once, see how it feels. No pressure. No pressure. The phrase felt like someone had opened a window in a stuffy room. I hung up with a time and address, and a promise to come as you are. Saturday morning, my alarm went off at 6:15. Every cell in my body protested. You could sleep in, my inner voice argued. It's your one day with no schedule. The other voice, the one that had made me call in the first place, said, you've been sleeping in and feeling awful afterward. Try something different. So I got up. The sky was still dim when I pulled on jeans, an old sweatshirt, and my most forgiving pair of sneakers. I pinned my hair back, skipped makeup, and grabbed a tote bag with a water bottle and a granola bar in it. St. Mark S. was an old red brick church on the edge of downtown, the kind of place you drive past without really seeing because you're watching the light ahead. That morning, I really saw it. Steam rose from a metal grate near the basement steps. Hand-lettered sign taped to the door read, Soup Kitchen Volunteers and Guests Welcome. The air smelled faintly of onions and coffee. I hesitated at the top of the steps. Is this ridiculous? I wondered. You're almost 60 and walking into a church basement like it's a grand adventure. Then Denise opened the door. You must be Elaine, she said, smiling like we'd met before. You called Tuesday. I'm so glad you came. Her welcome cut through my nerves. Inside, the basement looked exactly like every church basement I'd ever seen, and nothing like I expected. Long folding tables and metal chairs. A cross on the far wall. Fluorescent lights humming above. But there was also a huge stainless steel serving line, industrial-sized pots bubbling on the stove, and a row of volunteers already busy. Aprons and gloves are over there, Denise said, pointing. Hairnets are stylishly mandatory. I laughed and tied on an apron, snapping on gloves that crinkled faintly. The work was simple, which is not the same as easy. We buttered slices of bread. We filled salt and pepper shakers. We stirred an enormous pot of soup that smelled like tomatoes and garlic, and something else I couldn't place. We lined up bowls and spoons. Someone brewed coffee in machines bigger than my first car. First time, the woman next to me asked as we chopped carrots. Is it that obvious? I replied. She smiled. I'm Jenna, she said. Been here about a year. I started because my kids needed service hours. They stopped, I stayed. Elaine, I said. I saw a flyer at work and thought, why not? That's how it gets you, she said. The why not? At 9 on the dot, the doors opened. People flowed in, some alone, some in pairs, some clearly regulars. There were men in worn jackets and women with tired eyes, and a handful of kids whose feet didn't quite touch the floor when they sat. Good morning, I found myself saying over and over as I ladled soup into bowls and slid them along the counter. Here you go, enjoy. Some nodded, some murmured thanks. A few looked at me like eye contact was a luxury they weren't used to. About an hour in, as I was refilling the bread basket, a man in a faded baseball cap paused in front of me. You're new, he said. I nodded. First Saturday, I replied. He studied me for a second. Hope we see you again, he said. You've got a good way about you, like you see people. Then he moved on. I stood there, bread tongs in hand, thrown off by how much that simple comment landed. Like you see people. When was the last time someone said that to me? When was the last time I felt like I saw people at work, beyond their extension numbers and inboxes? The morning flew. The big pot was scraped near the bottom. The coffee urns were half empty, and the room buzzed with the kind of soft hum that happens when people have eaten and warmed up. We cleaned, wiped tables, broke down chairs, wrapped leftover bread. As I untied my apron, Denise walked over. "So," she asked, "how'd it go?" I thought about the faces in the line, the steady rhythm of ladle, bowl, good morning. The way my mind had gone blessedly quiet while my hands were busy. "I liked it," I said slowly. "A lot more than I expected," she smiled. "Then come back," she said. "We're here every week." On the drive home, the world looked strangely sharper, the sky bluer, the tree trunks darker, the traffic less annoying. I felt tired, yes, but in a different way. Not drained, used in the best sense of the word. The next Saturday, I came back, and the next, I started to recognize people. There was the man in the baseball cap, his name was Ray, who always asked for an extra slice of bread, but never pushed for more than we could give. There was the older woman who wore 3 sweaters, no matter the weather, and tucked packets of sugar into her pocket for later. There was the young guy with the tattoo of a guitar on his forearm, who always said thank you, ma'am, like his grandmother was listening. There were also the volunteers. Jenna, with her quick laugh. Marcus, who ran the coffee station like a barista at a fancy cafe. A retired nurse named Pat, who somehow knew exactly when someone needed a gentle joke and when they needed quiet. And then there was Claire. Claire was probably early 40s, with a precise haircut and the kind of posture that said yoga, not stress. She wore the same yellow volunteer t-shirt as everyone else, but somehow still looked like she'd walked out of a catalog. She and I ended up side by side at the serving line one week, the steam fogging our glasses. "Elaine, right?" she asked, between scoops. "That's me," I said. "You're Claire?" "Guilty," she said, smiling. "I'm usually here every other week, but I've been traveling for work." "What do you do?" I asked, sliding a bowl toward a guest. "HR," she said. "People and culture stuff, mostly. I spend a lot of time in conference rooms, so this keeps me grounded." I laughed. "I spend a lot of time in conference rooms too," I said, "but on the very opposite end of the table. Administrative support." She glanced at me. "That's a nice way to put the one who actually keeps everything running," she said. I shrugged. "Some days," I said. "Other days I feel like I'm just wrestling the copy machine." She grinned. Over the next few months, we fell into an easy rhythm. We didn't become best friends, exactly. Life was too full for that. But we became soup kitchen friends, the kind who know each other's voices over the clatter of dishes and can catch up in 10-minute snippets while refilling coffee. She knew I had a daughter and a grandson. I knew she worked for a mid-sized company on the other side of town. We knew we both liked strong coffee and that neither of us would ever turn down a fresh roll. What she didn't know was how often, in my regular job, I felt invisible. What I didn't know was how carefully she watched the way I dealt with people in that basement. I didn't know that every time I remembered a guest's name, or calmly redirected a man who was having a hard morning, or quietly washed dishes without being asked, she was adding invisible check marks in her mind under a heading I didn't know existed yet. Leadership, emotional intelligence, grace under pressure. I wasn't volunteering to impress anyone. I wasn't networking or strategizing or planning a career move. I was just trying to feel useful in a world that had slowly made me feel small. And that's why, when the shift ended one ordinary Saturday in March and Claire asked if I had just a minute, I didn't think anything of it. I hung up my apron, tossed my gloves, and met her by the door, where the weak spring sunlight spilled in. "What's up?" I asked. She shifted the strap of her bag on her shoulder. "This might sound a little out of the blue," she said, "but how happy are you at your job these days?" I laughed, a short, surprised sound. "That's a loaded question," I said. "On a scale from absolutely thrilled to secretly Googling lottery odds, I'm somewhere in the middle," she smiled, but her eyes stayed serious. "The reason I ask," she said, "is that we have a position opening up at my company. It's a bigger job than admin. More responsibility, more pay, more impact. And every time we talk about the kind of person we need, I keep thinking about you." My brain, which had been happily focused on soup and bread and the immediate needs of the morning, tripped over her words. "Me," I repeated. "Claire, I've been in the same mid-level role forever. I haven't exactly been climbing ladders." "I know," she said, "but here's what I see every time we work together. You show up. You're steady. You treat people with respect, whether they're wearing a suit or everything they own. You keep things moving without making it about you. And you don't flinch when things get messy." She gestured around the basement. "Those are the exact skills I wish half the people in our leadership pipeline had," she said. I stared at her. "I don't have the right titles," I said weakly. "Titles can be learned," she said. "Character is harder to teach." A breeze slipped in from the open door, carrying the faint smell of dish soap and coffee. What kind of job?" asked, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. "Manager of Community Partnerships," she said. "It's a new role. We're expanding our outreach programs, trying to build real relationships instead of just writing checks. It's someone who can coordinate with nonprofits, understand real needs, and get things done without drama." "It sounds," I began. "Like it was written for you," she finished, half teasing, half serious. It did, and that terrified me. "Look," she said, softening. "I know this is a lot. I'm not promising you anything. You'd still have to interview, just like anyone else. But I wanted to ask if you'd even be open to it. Because if you are, I'd like to walk your resume upstairs myself." I thought of my gray cubicle, my endless spreadsheets, my sinking feeling on Sunday nights. I thought of the way I felt leaving this basement, tired, yes, but full. Like I'd spent my energy on something that mattered. I thought of the flyer that had started this whole thing. The ones I'd started noticing in other places, now too, little invitations to step into the world instead of just watching it scroll by. And then I thought of something my grandmother used to say when she caught me hesitating as a child. "Not every open door is yours," she'd say. "But if you never step through any, you're going to spend your life staring at hallways." I met Claire's eyes. "I don't know if I'm qualified," I said honestly. "No, I'm interested." A slow smile spread across her face. "That's all I needed to hear," she said. "Bring me your resume. And maybe next Saturday, instead of just talking about soup, we'll talk about your second act." Second act. The phrase lodged in my chest like a seed. I had come to this basement to ladle soup and feel useful for a few hours a week. I hadn't realized I was also quietly auditioning for a life I hadn't let myself imagine. I didn't sleep much that Saturday night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the soup kitchen basement and Claire's face by the door, heard her say second act, like it was the most natural thing in the world for a woman pushing 60 to start over in her career. Sunday afternoon, I opened my laptop and stared at the blinking cursor in a blank document labeled Resume Elaine. I hadn't updated it in 12 years. Back then, my goal had been simple. Get in somewhere stable, do good work, hang on until retirement. It hadn't occurred to me that I might want more than tolerable from Monday through Friday. Now, as I scrolled through old job descriptions and bullet points, they all felt flat. Maintained office supply inventory, coordinated meeting schedules, processed expense reports. All true, Also small compared to what my days actually looked like. Because here's the unspoken thing about women in roles like mine. You end up doing far more than your job title suggests. You mediate conflicts. You spot problems before they blow up. You remember that Tom's mom is sick and that Lisa's kid has a peanut allergy and that the copier is going to die if someone doesn't call maintenance. You become the unofficial glue. And for the past 6 months, in a church basement, I'd been quietly practicing a different version of that, keeping a line moving, to escalating tension with a joke, spotting the guest whose shoulders were slumped a little lower than usual, and making sure they got an extra smile with their bowl. The problem was, none of that had ever made it onto paper. I took a breath and started typing. I added a volunteer experience section, which felt both too small and exactly right. Volunteer, St. Mark's Soup Kitchen ongoing. Serve weekly meals to 8,120 guests, maintaining calm and respectful interactions in a fast-paced environment. Coordinate with volunteers to keep service line running efficiently, anticipate needs, and resolve issues on the spot. Build relationships with diverse guests, offering a consistent, welcoming presence. I read it over and realized it was the first part of my resume that actually sounded like me. By Monday, I had something I wasn't embarrassed to send. I emailed it to Claire with a short note. Here it is. Still nervous. Still interested. She replied within the hour. Looks great. I'll pass it to our hiring manager today. You'll likely get a call this week to set up an interview. Deep breaths. You've got this. Deep breaths became my theme for the next few days. At work, everything suddenly looked different. The gray cubicle walls that had blended into the background now felt closer. Fluorescent lights harsher. The endless forms, even more endless. But I also noticed my own competence in a new way. The way I diffused a tense conversation between 2 department heads over a scheduling conflict. The way I caught an error in a report before it went to a client. The way my boss leaned on me without even realizing how much. These are skills, I reminded myself, not just helpfulness. Wednesday afternoon, my cell buzzed with an unfamiliar number as I was walking to my car. Hi, is this Elaine? A woman's voice asked when I answered. Yes, I said, heart thumping. This is Marissa from Crestline Partners, she said. Claire passed along your resume for our manager of community partnerships position. I'd love to schedule a time for you to come in and talk. For a second, I forgot how words worked. Yes, I managed. I'd love that. We set a time for the following Tuesday morning. The moment I hung up, nerves and excitement twisted together in my chest. Who do you think you are? One voice whispered. You've been in the same role for 2 decades. They're going to see right through you. Another voice, quieter but growing, replied. You've kept offices running for 20 years and fed half the neighborhood on Saturdays. You belong at that table as much as anyone. At weekend at the soup kitchen, I told Claire the interview was on the calendar. She lit up. Good, she said. I'll stay out of the actual interview process, but I'm rooting for you. Just be yourself. Tell the truth. Don't undersell what you do. Undersell, I echoed. I feel like all I've done is undersell for 20 years. She nodded, expression softening. I see that a lot, she said, especially with women your age. You talk about your experience like it's nothing special, when I'm sitting there thinking, do you understand how valuable this is? She put a hand on my arm. You're not starting from zero, she said. You're just finally putting words to what you already know how to do. Tuesday arrived faster than I thought it would. I stood in front of my closet early that morning, realizing most of my clothes fell into 2 categories: comfortable for desk work and comfortable for chopping vegetables. I pulled out my best blazer, a simple navy one I'd bought years ago, just in case, and worn exactly twice. It still fit. I paired it with a soft blouse, dark pants, and the one pair of shoes I trusted not to pinch after an hour. As I put on a little mascara and lipstick, I caught my reflection and paused. Lines around the eyes, silver threads in my hair, a neck that no amount of cream was going to rewind. And yet, I looked like someone who had lived, who had carried a lot and still stood upright. Second act, I murmured to the mirror. Let's see what you've got. Crestline Partners building was all glass and steel and sunlight. The lobby smelled like coffee and money, but not in an intimidating way. More like it had cleaned up nicely for company. I checked in at the front desk, got a visitor badge clipped to my lapel, and rode the elevator up to the 12th floor. My heart pounded faster the higher we climbed. Marissa, the hiring manager, met me in a bright conference room with big windows and a bowl of peppermints on the table. She was maybe late 30s, with kind eyes and a firm handshake. Elaine, it's great to meet you, she said. I've heard wonderful things about your work at St. Mark S. My volunteer work, you mean, I corrected automatically, then winced. She smiled. Volunteer work is still work, she said. And from what Claire shared, it's exactly the kind we value here. We settled in, resumes and notepads between us like polite chaperones. So, she began, tell me a little about what drew you to this role. The old me would have launched into something about looking for a new challenge and bringing my organizational skills to a new environment. All technically true, all bloodless. The new me took a breath and told a different truth. I've spent most of my career making other people's priorities run smoothly, I said, and I've been good at it. But over the last few years, I started to feel disconnected, like my days didn't add up to anything beyond a paycheck. I told her about the flyer, the first Saturday, the line of guests, the way my mental fog had started to clear in the steam of that soup kitchen. I realized I was more energized after 5 hours down there than I was after a full week at my desk, I said. Not because it was easier, it was, but because I could see the impact, could remember faces, not just file numbers. She nodded, jotting something down. And that's when this role caught your eye, she asked. That's when Claire mentioned it, I said. And the more I heard, the more it sounded like a way to bring everything I've learned, keeping things running, dealing with all kinds of personalities, making limited resources stretch into a space that directly benefits the community. We talked about specifics. She asked how I'd handle building relationships with local nonprofits. I talked about learning the culture of St. Mark's and how listening before suggesting anything had helped me fit in and actually be helpful instead of just extra hands. She asked how I'd respond if a partner organization was unhappy with our involvement. I told her about a morning when a guest was frustrated and raising his voice at the line, and how I'd stepped in not to shut him down, but to hear him out, find the real problem. He hadn't gotten a coat from the donation table the week before and thought we'd forgotten him, and solve it without embarrassing him. She asked how I felt about learning new systems and speaking in front of groups. Admitted I hadn't done formal public speaking since my kids' school PTA days, but that I'd started leading the orientation for new volunteers at the kitchen recently when Denise was running late. I was terrified the first time, I confessed. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the clipboard, but by the third time, it felt natural. I realized I've spent my whole life explaining things to people, coworkers, kids, guests. This was just a new context. She smiled at that. Can I be honest with you, Elaine? She said, after we'd covered the usual bases. I'd prefer it, I said. We get a lot of applicants who have all the right corporate buzzwords, she said. They can talk about strategic alignment and stakeholder engagement until your eyes glaze over. But when you ask them for an example of handling real people in real situations, everything sounds hypothetical. She tapped my resume lightly. You, on the other hand, talk about cleaning up coffee spills and calming someone who hasn't had a kind word all week like they're part of the job, she said. Because they are, she sat back. We'll be meeting with a few other candidates, she said. But I can tell you this, what you've done both in your paid work and at St. Mark's translates more than you think. 2 days later, my phone rang while I was stirring a pot of chili in my own kitchen. This is Marissa from Cressline, the voice said when I answered. You have a minute? My stomach dropped and fluttered at the same time. Sure, I said, turning the burner down and leaning against the counter. We'd like to formally offer you the manager of community partnerships position, she said. Your references were glowing, and the team felt an immediate connection with your experience and approach. We think you'd be a great fit. For a moment, the world went quiet. The ticking clock on the wall, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint traffic noise outside. All of it receded under the weight of those words. We'd like to offer you. Are you still there? She asked, a hint of laughter in her voice. I am, I said, realizing I'd been holding my breath. This is the first time anyone said that to me for something other than the same job I've been doing forever. Well, she said, consider this your official invitation to a new chapter. We went over the details. The salary, higher than I dared hope. The benefits, the flexible schedule. Fact that they actually expected me to be out in the community some days instead of chained to a desk. When we hung up, I stood in my tiny kitchen, phone in one hand, wooden spoon in the other, and laughed until tears spilled down my cheeks. I called my daughter Megan first. Mom, she answered, wary. Everything okay? Better than okay, I said. You know how you've been telling me it's never too late to start over? Yeah, she said slowly. Well, I said, apparently the universe agrees. I told her everything. She whooped so loudly my grandson started yelling, What happened? What happened? In the background. Grandma got a new job, she told him. A really good one. He yelled, yay, like he understood. In that moment, I realized something important. This wasn't just a career change. It was a story my grandson was going to grow up hearing, the one where his grandmother didn't just wind down, she leveled up. Following Saturday at the soup kitchen, I pulled Claire aside by the coffee urn. Well, she asked, eyes bright. Did you hear? I did, I said, still a little dazed. They offered me the job. She let out a breath she'd clearly been holding too. I knew it, she said, pulling me into a quick, squeaky hug against our plastic aprons. I just knew it. I stepped back, wiping at my eyes. I don't have words big enough for what I owe you, I said. If you hadn't brought it up, she shook her head. You don't owe me, she said. I just did what I wish more people would do when they see someone quietly being wonderful in a corner. Say something. Open a door. The rest was all you. She glanced around the busy basement. And if you're worried I'm going to lose you here, she added, don't. We're still counting on you for at least a Saturday a month. Manager of community partnerships or not, I laughed. You're not getting rid of me that easily, I said. This place is part of why I'm even ready for that job. As I tied on my apron and stepped back into the line, the work felt different. Not because the tasks had changed, they hadn't. Bread still needed buttering. Coffee still needed pouring. People still needed to be greeted with dignity. It felt different because I now understood something the articles about volunteering always hint at but rarely say outright. When you show up consistently, you're not just giving, you're also being seen. By others, by yourself, by opportunities that don't show up in job postings. I had started serving soup to feel less invisible. I didn't know the line I was standing in each week was leading straight to a door I'd almost forgotten to hope for. If part 2 was the pinch me, is this real? Chapter part 3 is where I learned to live inside the answer. My last day at the insurance office was strangely quiet. I turned in my badge, cleared out my desk, and hugged coworkers who said all the right things. "We'll miss you. They're lucky to have you. You're so brave to do this." Even if some of them looked at me like I'd just announced I was moving to Mars. 57-year-old women don't usually leave something safe for something new. At least, not the ones in our office. That night, I slept better than I had in years. On my first morning at Crestline Partners, I arrived 15 minutes early and sat in my car, watching the sun bounce off the glass facade. "Okay," I told myself, "you're not here as someone's assistant. You're here because they chose you." The lobby receptionist handed me a visitor badge out of habit, then corrected herself with a grin. "Actually, this is for you," she said, passing me a new badge with my photo and the words "Manager Community Partnerships" under my name. Weight of the plastic in my hand felt symbolic and very real. Orientation was the usual blur of HR paperwork, computer logins, and this is where we keep the coffee. But then came the part that made all of it click into place. My first meeting with the senior leadership team to talk about what my role would actually do. I walked into a glass-walled conference room carrying a notebook, a pen, and 6 months worth of soup kitchen Saturdays in my bones. Round the table sat the CEO, Claire, the head of marketing, and a couple of department leaders I'd only seen in glossy website photos. "Elaine," the CEO said, standing to shake my hand. "We're very glad you're here. Claire has been raving about your work at St. Mark's." I felt my cheeks warm. "Thank you," I said. "I'm excited and a little overwhelmed, if I'm honest." He smiled. "Good," he said. "If you weren't at least a little overwhelmed, I'd wonder if we set the bar high enough." We talked about the company's existing community efforts, sponsoring a charity walk here, writing a check there. Nice gestures, but scattered. "What we've been missing," the CEO said, "is someone who actually knows what's happening on the ground. Someone who can look at all these one-off efforts and say, this is where we can actually make a difference. That's where you come in." I thought of Ray in his baseball cap, the woman with 3 sweaters, the young man with the guitar tattoo. "I don't know all the answers," I said, "but I know what it looks like when help shows up for one day, takes a photo, and disappears. And I know what it looks like when help shows up week after week and learns names." "Exactly," Claire said. "We're not interested in photo ops. We're interested in partnerships." Over the next few months, my days looked wildly different from anything I'd known in my safe job. Some days I was in that glass conference room, presenting ideas for long-term partnerships with organizations like St. Mark's and the local food bank. Other days, I was back in church basements and community centers, not in an apron this time, but with a Crestline badge on my blazer, asking directors what they actually needed instead of assuming we knew. Sometimes the answer was money. Sometimes it was volunteers, regularly, not just on a day of service, in matching t-shirts. Sometimes it was something as simple as we need someone who understands spreadsheets and can help us track this grant. My 2 worlds, spreadsheet competence and soup kitchen compassion, had finally met in one job description. The first time I stood up in front of a room full of Crestline employees to talk about our new volunteer partnership with St. Mark's, my knees shook a little. I clicked to the slide that showed a photo of the basement, tables, steam, volunteers, guests, and cleared my throat. "I know some of you think soup kitchen and picture a sad, dim room with a long, silent line," I said. "But that's not what it feels like from the inside. From the inside, it feels like a place where people remember your name when the rest of the world walks past. I told them about the first Saturday I'd shown up with my hairnet askew and my heart pounding, thinking I had nothing to offer but time. I told them about Ray and his extra slice of bread, and about the guest who told me, "You're new, but you see people." Then I told them about how Claire had noticed me there, how all those little Saturdays had quietly added up to the job title on my badge. "You never know who's watching you do the right thing when nobody's grading you," I said. "You never know which room is your audition for a life you don't even know to ask for yet." Later, in the hallway, women I'd never met before stopped me. "I'm 52, one whispered, eyes wet. "I thought it was too late to change anything." Another said, "I've been thinking about volunteering, but kept talking myself out of it." I think this was the nudge I needed. At home, life shifted too. My daughter joked that I had more energy at the end of the day now than I used to have on Friday nights after my old job. "You're tired, but it's a good tired," she said. "You come home talking about people, not just problems." She wasn't wrong. Volunteering had given me that first jolt of purpose again, the sense that I mattered beyond my inbox. The new job amplified it. I still had to deal with budgets and metrics and quarterly goals. I still had to sit through meetings that could have been emails. This wasn't some fairy tale life without stress. But now, when I opened a spreadsheet, I could see who was on the other side of those numbers. Families getting food boxes, seniors getting rides, kids getting tutors. Those were the clients my work touched now. The phrase soup kitchen shift to CEO suite sounds dramatic, and I suppose from the outside, it is. But here's what I want you to hear, sitting wherever you are, maybe with a cup of coffee cooling beside you, and a familiar knot of "is this all there is?" in your chest. It didn't start with a grand plan. It didn't start with a perfect resume, or a networking strategy, or a vision board. It started with one tired, burned-out woman snapping a photo of a flyer in a break room because something in her gut whispered, "Why not?" It started with one phone call, one Saturday of tying on an apron, one morning of showing up when I could have stayed in bed. It started small. The karma in this story isn't magic. It's the simple truth that when you put yourself in places where your heart lights up, places that need what you naturally do well, people notice. Doors you didn't even know existed start to crack open. For me, the soup kitchen basement was that place. For you, it might be something else. Maybe it's the animal shelter you've driven past 1,000 times. Maybe it's mentoring at the community college. Maybe it's reading to kids at the library. Maybe it's calling the senior center and saying, "I've got a few hours and a good pair of listening ears. Do you need me?" You don't volunteer to get a job. You volunteer to remember who you are when no one's performance reviewing you. But sometimes, in the middle of handing out bowls or books or blankets, someone sees you doing what you do best and thinks, "We need that on our team." Sometimes, your just giving back becomes your bridge to a second act that fits you better than anything you've worn in decades. If you're between 45 and 65 and wondering if you missed your turn, let me be the voice you might not be hearing anywhere else. You didn't. You're not too old. You're not too late. You're not stuck with the first story you picked at 25. You are seasoned. You know how to read a room. You know how to keep going when things are hard. You know how to juggle more than anyone should have to. Those are not small things. Those are leadership muscles. Volunteering gave me a place to flex them where someone could actually see. Crestline gave me a title and paycheck that matched what I'd been quietly carrying for years. And the soup kitchen, I still show up a couple of Saturdays a month. I still tie on an apron and pull on gloves and stand behind that steam table. But now, when I look down the line, I see more than guests and bowls. I see my past self, tired, unsure, hoping this isn't all there is. I see women from my office, hairnets slightly crooked, taking nervous first steps into a new kind of room. I see possibility. If you were here beside me, I'd hand you a ladle, point you toward the line, and say, just try one shift. See how you feel. Because you never know. The bowl you fill might be exactly what someone needs to get through the day. And the person who's really being filled, one quiet act of service at a time, might be you.